Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into today's episode of the Money Insights Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Allen. With me, as always, Rod the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what is up, my friend? How are you, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Spring has sprung. It's warm up.
Spring
Even
has
in
sprung.
Utah, it's kind of warming up.
Yeah, well, it's cyclical. I was gonna say cyclical. We're on like a wild ride. It's like a roller coaster right now. It's like 70 degrees a couple weeks ago. Then it was like a blizzard last week. So we're just, riding the waves at this point. But I'm always excited about spring. Like springtime, just one of my favorite times of year because I'm not a cold weather person. And as I get older, I become less and less of a cold weather person. I can tell you with the certainty that I am absolutely going to be a snowbird for sure.
I believe you.
I'm gonna head
because when
south.
you get to be my age, you really start feeling it. And
I know. I can only imagine because I'm feeling it now. If it just keeps going this way, I have less and less tolerance for cold. Okay. Today, Rod, we're going to talk about the 401k trap. You know what's ironic about this? I have a 401k.
I do.
And I put money into it. And yet, we're still going to talk about the 401k trap. Now, I should clarify, our situation is a little different. We're not actively contributing on our own to it so much as just the companies that we work with are contributing to it. So it is a little different, but I just want to be really authentic. Like I have a defined benefit plan and a 401k. So do you. And we're still going to talk about why the 401k can often be more of a trap than what it's, made out to be.
Yeah. Just in our conversations with people, it's clear that it's different than what people think it is. And maybe once they understand everything, they'll still like it. They'll still think that it's the best thing in the world. But I think we might open some eyes.
Yeah. So the hope today is that we can peel back that onion a little bit, open things up, and let's talk about the real value versus perceived value that potentially exists inside of 401k. Because I think most people, now this isn't our listeners, but I think most people are at least a little bit, I don't want to say confused, deceived. Can I say deceived? They're just, they haven't done the fact checking, run the numbers to see how these things actually play out. Yeah. Right. So we live in this space all the time. So of course we're going to be thinking about okay, well, does it really make sense if XYZ, if you're making $500,000 today and you save $100,000 a year, well, there's a real chance you're going to be in just the same tax bracket later. Yeah. Right. So suddenly, anyway, we're going to get into that. We're going to break it all down. And I also just want to clarify this point. Most of the people listening to this, maybe they don't even have 401ks. A lot of the high income world goes into that defined benefit plan, whether it's a cash balance plan, a deferred comp plan, something like that. So while we're going to say 401k, we very much are meaning anything that exists inside of a qualified plan. And I'm not saying qualified is in Roth, because I believe that is a different category. There's some elements there that might be worth touching on, but we're not talking about Roth. I'm talking about traditional qualified plans where I don't pay the tax, right? So I produce an income for whatever reason, whether it's my business or my working income, my job, then instead of taking that in, I put it into my 401k. I now don't pay the tax at that current moment. It's deferred up until the point in time when I need to take it with all the rules and regulations that come around that. So, Rod, I want to talk about the value and the perceived value that exists within the 401k. So, where do you want to start?
Should we start with why it came about?
I think that's a great starting point. Yeah, let's give some historical context. Why don't you kind of give us your thoughts around it? I have some ideas around that too.
Okay. So prior to the 401k, most people who had any type of retirement plan tied in with their work was a pension, right? So the company set aside money and invested it somewhere with the promise that when you retire, they would pay you a certain amount of income for the rest of your life, no matter how long you live. Right. So that was what it was
the
before
gold standard. The pension was
was
the gold standard,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And can I just tell you, there's a lot of people who mourn the death of the gold standard that was those kind of pensions. And we'll talk about why in a minute, but keep going.
Yeah. So there are probably a few reasons why the shift happened, but back around and basically in the 70s, the companies, the governments, all these entities that were offering pensions started thinking, well, why are we taking all of the responsibility for these promises made? What if we instead shift that to the individuals and let them make their own investment decisions, decide how much they're going to set aside, how they're going to invest it, etc. So I think that was one side of it. But I think that was also balanced with, on the other side, people saying, hey, I just think I could do better than you, right? Let me decide on my own retirement, on my own investments, and hopefully I can do better than what would have happened in the pension world.
So the way I view that is, then we've got this, and again, this is a problem for everybody. This is a problem for governments, for large corporations, across the board, because people live longer today than they ever have before. So if you were offering pensions, maybe you weren't expecting to go for 30 years. You were expecting to pay it out for like 10 or 15 years, right?
Yeah.
So, and we run into this exact same issue with Social Security. And so, of course, what's happening then is these companies, Social Security, the government, they're seeing the problem. They're seeing that, oh, we're not going to be able to manage and be able to produce this if we keep going down this road, right? That's why we've seen corrections in things like, we see the retirement age move up. I don't even know what is it, 67, 68 now, something like that.
Yep.
So, and those things kind of keep getting adjusted because there's not enough money inside the program, inside the plan. And the main reason for that is because people live a lot longer today than they did when they initially came up with those types of plans. So people who got put into those plans are like, that's what they really did get a gold standard. And oftentimes they were getting paid as much in their retirement as they were in their working years.
Sure.
But
yeah.
Think about the mechanics around how difficult it is to pay somebody to do a job that they haven't done for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So to your point, they're like, okay, we've got to come up with a better solution. And we're going to package it up in this really exciting, you get to now own this and do it yourself opportunity. So instead of talking about the shift in risk, which is really, from my perspective, what it was about, instead of focusing on the shift in the risk, it was the shift in, hey, now you get to control this. And we love that. I mean, think about how often we talk about the ability to control our own money, our own investments. Yeah. And yet in this situation, for most people, it's going to be more difficult. Is that fair to say?
Right.
And of course, we've seen that. So you have like the baby boomer generation. It's filled with wealth. And a lot of it is because they relied on this system that was very different than the system we have today, right? So for some of those today, maybe they've been like in the middle, right? Not certainly there's not. But if you retired 20 years ago, like most of those people had pensions.
Yep.
Right. Especially, I mean, schools and like really any government position was pension, education, like just all sorts of things. So anyway, that was a big deal. Now that people are living longer, they had to come up with a better way. And so beautiful. Now we have this 401k, everything you could hope for, all the same benefits. You get the tax deferral. Now you get to choose your own investments, Rod. Now
do it on your own terms.
That's exciting. Do it all on your own terms. Okay. So that's basically like the formulation of how the 401k came about. I think that's at least a reasonably good run down memory lane as far as how 401ks actually came about. We don't need to get into too much of the nitty gritty. Just know that the baseline is this. They didn't want to take on the responsibility, keep that responsibility. And again, I don't blame a company or a government for doing it. It wasn't working. So they literally were forced to create this. And, the way I view it is they just kind of packaged it up in a way that made it seem like, hey, this is actually way better for everybody.
Yep.
And so we all just are like, great, 401ks, like the government's providing these awesome tax benefits. I'm all in. So I feel like that gives us some pretty good context in terms of what the 401k or why it was created, gives us an idea of when. I actually don't know the exact year, but probably in the 70s, late 70s.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
guessing.
77, 78 seems like.
So yeah, anyway, but again, the main point that we want people to take away from that is just understanding the why behind it. Instead of just assuming that a 401k is awesome and it was just like there for these like really great altruistic reasons, the government just loves to give like value to the American people.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe there's some of that, but the reality it came out of need, right? It was created out of a need for a system that was broken and just getting worse and worse and worse. So then, of course, this way, instead of it being broken on a company level or a government level, it can just be broken on an individual level. So that's kind of where we're at.
Brilliant.
Okay. So Rod, I want to move into talking about the real value of a 401k and what I would qualify as the perceived value.
Got it.
Kick us off. Which one do you want to start with?
Well, let's start with, I mean, I think we can hit on some things really easily. Like the fact that it is a forced savings for people. Like you show up, you sit down with the HR director and they say, hey, we have this 401k. Well, this is how it went for me. We sat down. She says, you should think about your future. I know you're young, but someday you're going to want to retire. You should start putting money aside now, because just imagine, and talked through kind of the compound growth and all this kind of stuff. And I was 23 years old. And I was like, well, yeah, this all sounds amazing. So let's do it. So,
and you were thinking automatic millionaire.
At least, yeah. I could retire.
That's the way to do it.
Anytime now.
No problem. Well, think about it. The idea that this forced savings idea that you brought up really is an actual benefit for a lot of people, right? So, and again, I was actually referring to the book, The Automatic Millionaire, where the whole point is to automate everything. So you're not thinking about it. It's just going. I don't have to think every time I need to take something and go save it. It just happens.
Yeah.
Right. And that, I think, is a value. People are able to save much more effectively as a whole. I don't know if this I don't know, like as you get into higher income phases, I don't know that this applies as broadly, but I think especially early on, or maybe, the average person, they're more likely to save if they never see it hit their bank account.
Yep.
So one of the greatest benefits is that it doesn't hit your bank account. It goes straight into it. Boom, done.
Yeah. And so often it's a percentage of your income. So as you get raises, well, now you're setting aside more money as a result.
And that is, and so I think that is genuinely is a positive thing. Okay. Another positive element, and maybe we should just remind people, 401ks, qualified plans. I put money in. I already kind of stated this, but I'm going to restate it just to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
I take my income. I choose to put it in the 401k or some type of qualified plan, which means I don't have to pay tax on that money until the time that I take it out. So we call it tax deferral, right? But if you listen to Rod ever, you know that he's not nearly as satisfied with tax deferral as he is with real tax savings. And that's going to be something we're going to dig into and kind of get to the bottom of. So maybe we should just go that route, Rod. So there are some benefits, right? Obviously, tax deferral, I was going to say it's probably a little bit better than just, putting money in a brokerage account, right? I am still getting more value than I'm like, maybe. Okay. Well, we can talk about it, right?
Yeah, we will.
So I think about those elements and okay, that could be, but you're right. At the end of the day, there's a bunch of factors that are going to play into whether it's actually good for me. And that's what we really need to unpack, because this is the challenge. People assume that it's a tool that was given to us and therefore it is good for us. The reality may look very different. If we actually unpack the different pieces, we can determine whether it's something that will likely be good for us or not, but we have to bring the factors into it. Well, what are the factors? It's things like future tax rates, current tax rate and future tax rates, current income tax brackets and actual income and future tax, deduction opportunities in the future versus what's here today. Maybe there's a bunch of factors, but those are kind of the core things that I just absolutely have to be thinking about. And my experience is most people just don't. They just are like, oh, this is just here. It's easy. It just makes sense. I'm going to take advantage of it. Okay. Yeah. Oh, and one other thing that I want to make sure we hit on is this idea that a lot of people who love life insurance like we love life insurance are like, believe it's the only thing, it's everything, always. That is not us. If you're getting a match on your 401k, particularly a strong match, if I have a dollar for dollar match, well, of course I'm going to take it. Like, it just makes more sense to take it. Even, I believe, even if I have to make that contribution to get that match, it's still worth taking, right? If I'm getting that strong match. And so that, I think, it is important to realize that that's a value. We don't want to be like so bullheaded that we're like, oh, this is because of these other maybe restrictions that exist, I'm not going to necessarily take advantage of the opportunity that is there. We just want to delineate what's real and what's not. Well, 100% return on my money immediately is real.
Yep.
The possibility of paying less in taxes in the future, that's not real. That is very much up in the air at this point. Okay,
right.
Rod, talk to us. I know you've been building out kind of a visual to help us understand some of this element. Why don't you break it down for us so we can understand what are the real values, what are the perceived values, what are the things you're taking into account to get to the solution or the decision. What's the right word I'm looking for? The
determination of whether it makes sense or not, right?
Great. Let's roll with it.
Okay, so this specifically focuses on I think a misperception that is in some cases implied, but in some cases just plain out is what people are telling.
Yes.
What they're told. And that is, it's better to put the money pre-tax into your investments because now you have more money working for you. And that's just going to be better in the long run, no matter what.
Well, of course, Rod, just think of it. It's just the math, isn't it?
That's what you think, right?
That's what people think. Okay.
So here's my visual.
So you're challenging that. That's what's happening here.
I am, and I think I have the math to back it up. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see it. I'll try to describe it a little bit. So if you're just listening to this, then you'll still catch the kind of the gist of what we're doing. So I just basically have a pretty basic spreadsheet here where I say, how much money am I setting aside? What's my tax rate today versus my tax rate when I retire? What I'm showing here is $25,000 a year that I'm setting aside. I'm assuming the same tax rate when I set the money aside as the tax rate when I retire. So in this case, 25% tax rate is what I'm in right now. And I'm going to still be in 25% when I retire. Well, again, we'll talk about why I should or shouldn't think that, but that's an important point for this example, because what it's going to show is that the pre-tax having more money in the account isn't necessarily going to help me. It might, but it won't necessarily. And then I'm assuming an 8% return. Again, it could be whatever. I'm just using 8%.
Okay. So $25,000 contribution, 25% tax rate, both now and into the future. So exactly the same. We're assuming that same variable with an 8% rate of return.
Yep. And what I'm going to do is compare side by side. I'll have the 401k pre-tax side, and then I'm going to have the Roth on the other side. And that's one of the really nice things is that a lot of employers now are offering, you can choose, hey, am I going to participate in the retirement plan? If so, am I participating on the pre-tax side or am I participating on the post-tax side? And again, hopefully this conversation will help you see the difference. So in year one, the $25,000 gets set aside. On the pre-tax side, there's no tax. It's just the $25,000 going into the account. At the end of that year, with my 8% return, I now have a balance of $27,000. Okay. If I compare that on the Roth side, I set aside $25,000, but I had to pay the tax on it, right? On the Roth, you pay the tax today. It then grows tax deferred, and then you take the money out later tax free, but you have to pay the tax now. Well, on that 25% tax bracket, that means of that $25,000, $6,250 goes into the taxes. And then I have $18,750 that lands in the account, earns the 8%. So at the end of the first year, I have $20,250. And I think we can all agree that $27,000 on the pre-tax side is more than $20,250 on the Roth side, right?
Good math, Rod. Good math.
Yeah. Yep. And so each year we're just continuing down the line, continuing to put $25,000 aside in each case. And I'm assuming we do that for 30 years. Okay. At the end of the 30 years on the pre-tax, on the 401k side, I have $2,147,391.
Okay.
On the Roth side, I have $1,610,543. And I think we can agree 2.1 million is bigger than 1.6. But here's the difference. That $2.1 million is not all my money, because as you talked about earlier, when I take that money out, I have to pay the tax on it. And I say that I either have to pay the tax on it. If I keep it till I die, my kids are going to have to pay the tax on it. Someone's going to have to pay the tax. It's not going to come out of that account without the tax being paid. So in that case, I end up having to pay $536,000 based on that 25% tax bracket, right? If I keep the tax bracket the same. And so my ending number is the exact same number. It's 1.6 million on the 401k after I paid the tax. It's the exact same number as what I was getting out of the Roth, where I don't have to pay a tax, right? So it works out to be the exact same number. Okay, so what's my point? My point is, it's less about having more money in the account growing on the pre-tax side than it is about what you were referencing earlier. What's my tax bracket when I retire compared to what my tax bracket was when I set that money aside? That makes a bigger difference, because if I change that bracket and I say, well, my tax bracket now is 25%, but when I retire, it's only going to be 20%. Now I have $1.7 million of spendable money on the 401k side compared to the 1.6 on the Roth side, right? And again, this is a very common perception out there that a lot of financial professionals will just state it as a given. Well, you're going to be in a lower tax bracket when you retire than you are when you're working. It's just obvious. Everybody knows.
Yeah, everybody knows that, Rod. That's why the 401k exists. That's why IRAs exist. So what's wrong with that?
You might be in a lower tax bracket. And so I'll put it this way. For people that I talk to on a daily basis, they hope they're not in a lower tax bracket. They hope they're not having to live off of less money in retirement than they are during their working years. So that's one thing. But the other thing is that when I have kids in my home and I get child tax credits and all kinds of things like that, I'm in a lower, that lowers my tax burden while I'm in my working years. And when I'm in retirement, I probably won't still have the kids around. They certainly won't be minors, right? I'm still certainly not going to get the tax credit still. On my home, most people, for a lot of people, the goal is to pay off their home by the time they retire. Therefore, you no longer have that tax deduction of the interest paid on your mortgage. And so that's potentially going to put you in
Here's another good one, Rod. Think about this. When you're working, especially if you're contributing to a 401k or an IRA, well, guess what? That's another deduction at that time that won't necessarily, probably won't exist when you're, deciding you're going to actually live off of that money instead.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a great point.
So like all of these things tend to shift. And here's the real kicker, or at least an additional kicker. Tax rates are historically low.
Yeah.
Like, people need to get this through their head. Like, we are not in I know that as high income earners, we always want to reduce taxes. And I'm 100% on board with that, strategically looking for ways to minimize tax, maximize our investment opportunities. Absolutely. However, Rod, there's more to it. And people just have to be willing to take that step back and really think it through.
Right. Because, well, as we know, we talked about earlier, Social Security is not working out the way that they had hoped, right? They're either going to have to reduce benefits or increase taxes for Social Security, Medicare, all the different obligations that they already have made. This isn't even including whatever Congress is going to do this year and next year to potentially continue to increase the burden that we bear. And so it's more likely, even if I'm taking the same amount of income in retirement as I was during my working years, chances are taxes are going to go higher. And so it's not going to be less of a tax rate. It's more likely to be a higher one. So let's say it was 25% when I set the money aside, and now it's 30% while I'm taking the income. Well, guess what? Remember I got the 1.6 on the Roth side? Well, now I'm only getting 1.5 out of the 401k side. In other words, I was worse off by putting it in pre-tax and paying the tax later than I would have been if I had just paid the tax at the time I earned it, set it aside in the Roth, and then I'm able to take it out tax-free.
Okay. So, and I think we should clarify, there are situations where we actually would recommend people to use qualified plans, right? We've talked about this in the past. We've had clients who came to us later in life. They needed to do some catch-up savings. It was a virtual certainty that they were going to have significantly less income And so it was like a way to try to catch up. Well, in that situation, when we know some of those variables, right, then we can make that determination. But the problem is most people we talk to are like really good, prolific savers. And those people, good news is they tend to get it, but those people won't be in a lower tax bracket, right?
Yep.
You have you know what, Rod? This is kind of an interesting, like, this is anecdotal evidence, but I believe it's evidence. Over the last, I don't know, 10 years, I've probably asked the question a couple hundred times. If you were to, guess for the future or prognosticate in the future, do you expect the taxes are likely to go up or down? I've quite literally never had somebody tell me, based on what I'm seeing out there, the national debt, so like, I've never heard anyone say, we're probably going to lower our taxes. It's just not likely to happen. And again, when you consider the fact that from a historical context, the last time that we were in a tax rate this low was like in the 1940s.
Yeah.
So like, again, we can't expect that taxes being lower is going to be some, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that's going to bail us out. It just isn't likely to do it. And instead, we need to start thinking strategically and look at it and say, okay, based on these factors, does it actually make sense for me to use this tool? Yeah. Well, for Rod and I, in some of the money, it does make sense for us to use that tool. And for the most of our money, it does not, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I can give some context to that, because we often talk about diversification in the sense of, the risk profile of my investments. And one way that we like to think about it as well is diversification of tax treatment. So when I get to retirement, and we've seen this, right? If all of my money is pre-tax and I'm just going to have to pay taxes on every dollar I spend for the rest of my life, that feels very different than it would be if you had money that was, maybe you have some money that's pre-tax, but you also have money that's in a Roth, or you have money that's kind of taxed as you go kind of thing, right? Just after tax money sitting in brokerage accounts or in real estate or in other things.
High cash value life insurance.
Right. And which acts more like the Roth, right? From a tax standpoint. So the point is that if when I get to retirement, I have all of my money in pre-tax places, probably not the best. And I would say if all of my money is in tax-free places, that's probably not the most efficient as well. I'd certainly feel better about that, right? Being able to just, every dollar I spend, I know I don't have to pay any income tax on it. But there's the standardized deduction, right?
Right. There's an element here where you can be strategic, and the key is to do what you're talking about. Have some diversity in your taxable incomes, right? So I can actually look at it and say, okay, if this money is going to come in and it's going to be taxable, here's, and then I might have XYZ deductions that are happening from my, especially in the alternative, investment world. I'm balancing these things out, and I've got, maybe a Roth IRA, and I've got high cash value life insurance. Like, I have these things that are happening around me. I can be really intentional when I get into that retirement stage. And in that way, I actually can reduce my taxable income, right? But you have to set it up on the front end to be like that. And so if you've just been pushing all of your money into qualified plans like a 401k, you're going to get to that phase of life and be like, shoot, I wish I would have done things a little bit differently. Like, I can say it without question. We've seen it hundreds of times. And one of the things that people always say is that they don't want to spend their money. They're like, every time I take a distribution from, I have to take an extra 10 grand from my 401k. I get hit with $3,500 of tax if I do it. So instead of, so instead of it being like a source of freedom and flexibility, it's like, angsty, right?
Yeah. It's an aggravation.
There's a lot of that kind of stuff that I think is important. Okay, Rod, we've spent a lot of time on this. I want to make sure that we go into a couple of other places.
Okay.
So let's talk about some of just the clear-cut challenges that exist within the 401k. So for example, we have to remember that we don't have access to this till we're 59 and a half without taking a 10% tax penalty. We could talk about like the very few exceptions outside of that, but they're rare and they're difficult to make work in an impactful way. So you should go in with the idea in your head that if I'm putting this money there, I'm not pulling it out until I'm 59 and a half. And probably that I'm not pulling it out or doing anything with it until I'm no longer working at the job and company that I'm currently at. Those two things are really critical, right?
Yep.
Because sometimes people are like, oh, I'm doing great. Let's just say theoretically, I've got a $2 million 401k, but for some reason I'm cash strapped, some sort of emergency came up. And I'm like, no big deal. I've got my 401k. Well, maybe I could go borrow against it. Not all can, right? Depends on the plan docs. But the point there is you just have to know that you're planning to lock that money up, or you're going to pay a price to get to it. And so then it becomes really inefficient if I'm putting money in my 401k and then I'm paying a 10% tax penalty to get it out. You know what I'm saying? Okay. So that's the first one. And obviously the other restrictions, like your opportunities to invest, I would say are generally pretty limited in a 401k, right? It's going to be stocks, bonds, mutual funds. And again, so let's just say like in that world, you could make a strong case, especially if we're not talking about like strong matches. If you just said 401k versus putting money in real estate, well, I would put money in real estate all day long. And just that would be a much better tax advantage for me than I could ever get out of the 401k.
Yeah.
So,
Agreed.
So investment options are limited. We obviously have penalties, those things. And then maybe the last one, and for me is the most important, and that's just lost opportunity cost. To me, I like to look for great opportunities to invest, whether that's in businesses or real estate or whatever. And if all of my money is pushed to that space, then I'm going to have a hard time finding and taking advantage of opportunities that could produce a significantly better return while also providing me at least, but I would say more, tax benefits along the way.
Yeah, for sure. And someone might say, well, what if you have money in that and you just put it in a self-directed IRA and you invest it that way? And the fact is that you can do that. Now that opens up your investment opportunities, the different things you can invest in. Well, if you're still working for that company, that's not a possibility because like you said earlier, you're kind of locked in that 401k until, in most cases, right? Until you no longer work for the company. But even if you do that, again, we just run into people who did that and then they get, 10, 20 years down the line and they're like, okay, so all of the wealth we built, we did inside of the self-directed IRA and it's been a great trip, but we missed out on a lot of tax opportunities that we otherwise could have had if it was after-tax money. And number two, now we're still in that boat where every dollar we spend for the rest of our lives is going to be taxable. And it just doesn't feel good.
So, and I'm not opposed to self-directed IRAs, self-directed 401ks. I think they can have like a valuable position, especially, let's just say theoretically, I'm someone who's come from the traditional world. Maybe I leave that world and I'm wanting to get in there. Well, most of my money might be over there. Well, that's still money that can be used for things. But to your point, if I'm starting at this level where I've got like this broader based knowledge, and especially if I'm not working with a company, having that money outside of a 401k is exponentially more valuable than the money inside of it for all of the reasons that we're kind of talking about. Okay. And I think we've talked pretty well about the tax gamble, right? Like we just don't know whether it's going to be, whether it's actually going to be a tax benefit to us or not. But I think if we read the tea leaves, especially if you're a high income earner, if you read the tea leaves, that would suggest to you that it's actually more likely to hurt you than to help. I want to talk for just a minute, Rod, about cash flow and accumulation. I know we beat this drum all the time, but it's like interwoven into the very fabric of the 401k concept, right? The idea that I'm going to push money into the market, I'm going to let it sit, do its thing and accumulate. And then at some point in time, I'm going to turn on, based on some pretty arbitrary ideas, philosophies, and rules, I'm going to turn on an income that's going to produce for me for the rest of my life. It's easy. We were doing that with pensions before. It was guaranteed from companies and governments. Now I just have to guarantee my own. Well, suddenly things look a lot different, right? And we've seen that in as we look at the actual traditional financial planning world, we literally saw them go from a 4% rule and continue to drop it down. Well, we were beating it up at 4%. I would beat it up if it was 5 or 6%. Yeah. But if we get down to 3.2%, that is just such an inefficient model. I can't say it enough. It's a painful thing. Because again, we just did that webinar yesterday and you were showing an example where this cash flow investor was taking a 13% distribution off of his investments comfortably. Well, that's a whole lot better without depreciating the assets. That's a whole lot better than hoping that my 4%, playing the roller coaster of the market, hoping that I'm not a victim of, sequence of return risk or just basic market risk. It's just, you're playing a crapshoot game, and it's one that you're more likely to lose than to win. So we just have to think about it in a totally different light, because as we've talked about, accumulation model is very much broken. And I believe it's a big part of the reason why the majority of Americans today aren't saving at the rate that they like. I just think that whole philosophy is just fundamentally flawed and broken. And if we could all start to remove this kind of philosophy to how do I replace my income in a definitive, consistent, practical way, then I suddenly have freedom and flexibility. A pot of money, it's just alone that doesn't do it. I have to have more than that. I have to have a plan that goes with it. And of course, the market plan could work, but I think you just have to ask yourselves the question, am I willing to say as I go into retirement, this could work, or do I need it to say this will work? For me, I'm not going to go in and say, we'll play the odds and hope for the best. Because again, like, even if it was 10% or 20% possibility of running out of money, that's 10 or 20% more than I'm willing to take on.
Yeah, absolutely. And the inherent problem with that is that if you say I'm going to rely on the stock market to get me to retirement, build up that accumulation nest egg, and it's going to be my chosen only vehicle in retirement in this distribution phase, there are just inherent problems with it. And I think you've illuminated that. But if you shift over to the cash flow model, so if you're relying on some combination of the two, then you're just going to be in a much better position than you would be, rather than just saying, hey, just whatever the market brings, I'm just going to take it.
Yeah. And I do think that that's a more like practical, realistic way to do it. Even my own world, I am not just a cash flow investor, right?
Yeah.
I invest for accumulation, but I'm investing in a way that I can turn those assets that that are focused on appreciation into an income stream if and when I want or need to, right? So I won't get into my situation, but the long and short is for most people, having a combination strategy does make sense. So we're not saying, this kind of goes back to our philosophy. We want to take the best of both worlds. We want to take the best of the traditional space. When it's valuable, let's take advantage of it. When it's not, let's not assume that it is, right? Okay, Rod, do you have any parting wisdom, parting thoughts before we call it for today?
Maybe just one thing, and that is you called out that example that we gave in the webinar yesterday, the 13%. And one thing that I think is really interesting from that example is that that this was a real life kind of client of ours, invested in a lot of different ways, started on the traditional side, actually had a pension as part of the income that he was taking. But the point is that we were making that 13% was only coming off of a portion of his assets. He still had a bunch of assets over there that were serving as liquidity, accumulation, or just appreciation in different places. They weren't kicking off income, but that was okay because the other portion of his assets were. And when you isolated the assets that were kicking off the income, it was like a 13% cash flow relative to the value of the assets. And again, going back to a point you made earlier, it was creating that cash flow and they're appreciating assets generally, right?
Right. Yeah. So it's just it's just so exponentially better, greater, creating more abundance, right? That's what's actually happening when I live. Okay. So I have one final parting thought, and then we'll sign off for today. And that is this: real wealth isn't about deferring money. It's about multiplying it.
Beautiful.
That's it. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth-building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.